Sometimes there becomes an anime that has such a level of popularity that it can literally do no wrong by anybody. A couple weeks ago I reviewed a Dragon Ball Z film called Dead Zone that was actually a pretty good start to a series of Dragon Ball Z films. Too bad things had to go down the crap. Granted, the crap inside the world's strongest isn't as smelly as its younger brother, the Tree of Might, but it's still got some pretty smelly crap. Indeed, gentlemen, the first thing is always first. The story for Dragon Ball Z, the world's strongest, is actually okay? But wait a second. If I just got done saying that the story, well, not really the story, but the movie was crap, and just now I'm starting off saying the story's actually okay, better than the Dead Zone even, then what the heck am I complaining about? Complaining aside for now, I'm going to talk about the actual story of the world's strongest first. Now, in The World's Strongest, it actually utilizes a good method of science fiction along with the fantasy elements of Dragon Ball Z. We have evil Dr. Wheelo, who's basically trapped under caverns and caverns of ice when his partner gets him out with the Eternal Dragon. As you can tell, though, the diabolical Dr. Wheelo getting freed by the Eternal Dragon can only spell danger for our glorious Z warriors. What I like is it isn't just your typical powerful overlord coming to take over the world. Yes, it does just pull off some of the same tropes Dragon Ball Z has been doing forever, but this did it much earlier than a lot of the other films to come out. Plus, the overall goal of the main villain isn't just to take over the world. He also wants to become the most renowned scientist. He wants to mix his brain with the world's strongest brawn. That's why it's called Dragon Ball Z, the world's strongest, given to us by English speakers, because they tend to name a lot of the movies back then, or rename them. Yeah, it's not actually originally called the world's strongest in Japanese. Just letting you know that. Please don't get angry. You can kind of say it's borrowing from the Captain Ginyu character and the ability to take over people's bodies, but to be honest with you, the Dragon Ball Z films have been borrowing from the series for their entire run. I mean, that's nothing new, and I forgive it for that. I'm just a little bit glad to see it do something a bit more unique for once. But even though it is a bit more unique from the other Dragon Ball Z films in terms of execution, there is one glaring problem in this film is the start of it. Time paradox! There is a massive time paradox. This movie does not mesh well with the original Dragon Ball Z series. In fact, their timelines are distorted heavily. First off, this film would have you believe that it takes place before Planet Namek. There's just one problem with that. Goku has learned Kaioken, and when Goku learned Kaioken, he got killed by Raditz, meaning he was up training with King Kai. But the other thing is, Piccolo is alive in this movie. And since it takes place before Planet Namek, well, you can tell that doesn't actually add up. Goku in this film's alive, and Piccolo's alive, but Piccolo was killed by Nappa when the Saiyans arrived, which Goku hadn't returned to Earth yet, which means he wasn't on Earth to use Kaioken and the Spirit Bomb. Which means it should be impossible for these two people to be together in this film. Not to mention, further proof of this is the fact that Gohan wasn't actually hanging out with Piccolo yet and being buddy with Piccolo like he is in this movie until after Goku died, which means is another reason why Goku shouldn't even be here. Yet he had a dream that used the exact same animation from when Nappa killed Piccolo. It was a dream he had during this pretty useless, unnecessary dream sequence that he has, which is it's some stupid song they insert at the beginning that doesn't need to be there. But basically, you can see where I'm going with this. When you are a seasoned Dragon Ball Z watcher like I am, you'll notice this thing and it will bother the hell out of you. Of course, most people will come at you just saying, but it's not supposed to be canon, it's not supposed to connect to the real story of the original Dragon Ball Z TV series. And to those people I say, no. No, you are wrong, because the movie that came out just before it aligns perfectly with the TV series. It takes place before Raditz even arrives. Not to mention, there's an entire saga in the TV series when Garlic Jr. returns, where he's come back to take revenge, where Goku wasn't there, because he's at Yard Rat, and these events, it ties in perfectly with the Dead Zone film. There is no way that the World's Strongest film ties in perfectly with the Dragon Ball Z TV series. Alright, you know what? Cut it off. I'm not talking about the story anymore. It is a travesty. It's unique, and that's the only thing that's good about it, is that it doesn't follow a lot of the same tropes the other ones do. Not to mention it was the first film to use the Spirit Bomb, so I can't say it for being repetitious in that regard. I am not talking about the story anymore. This time paradox is BS, and you all know it. This film is a travesty in that regard. Oh, I finally feel safe. We're talking about the characters instead. Now, since it's Dragon Ball Z, and most of you already know all the characters to Dragon Ball Z, I will refrain from talking about the original cast. Instead, I'm going to talk about the villains presented in this film. Now, there's two doctors, Dr. Wheelo and Dr. Cochin. Dr. Wheelo, who's been trapped in an icy prison for 50 years, and Dr. Cochin, who created 3 Cyber Warriors, which are the main warriors that Goku fight. The 3 warriors have basically no personality. They don't really talk. I actually don't think I remember an instance where they talked at all, to be honest with you. Not to mention, on the other hand, they have very ugly designs as well, except for the rubbery fat guy. There's a rubbery fat guy villain, and his power is kind of cool, but apart from it being cool, he looks ugly too. Even Dr. Cochin doesn't really bring much to the table. He's got like one cool fight hand-arm machine gun scene throughout the entire film. He doesn't really bring anything to it except to release Dr. Wheelo, our main villain, our best villain, and Dr. Wheelo. To be honest with you, Dr. Wheelo doesn't quite hold up to the villain that the last movie presented. I remember talking in my Dead Zone review that I rather liked Garlic Jr. I thought he was a really cool villain. With Dr. Wheelo, though, the very problem with him lies in the fact that I said the story was unique. He's not like the other villains. He's basically a brain in a jar. Well, a brain in a jar inside of a mechanical body of awesome power, that is. The whole point of him was the fact that he was a smart scientist, yet you don't really see any of that actually come into play. You never see him use any of his smarts, just the technology that already exists, which means he doesn't even have that backing him up. Instead, what we got was a hollow shell of a villain, no pun intended. Plus, there was these little Cybermen people, which is weird to me. That also kind of ties back to the paradox thing. I didn't talk about it. Why are there little Cybermen inside this movie? Yeah, they're slightly different. They got like a little face mask and they can talk. They're not really like the Cybermen, but apart from their little face area right here and the fact that they can talk, they are the exact design of the Cybermen from the Saiyan saga. I don't know what their deal is. They're not really actually very relevant. They do fight with Master Roshi, and that's pretty cool. And so don't the biomechanic warriors I was talking about earlier. They also fight with Master Roshi. I did like how Master Roshi was put in the spotlight a little more with this. I liked the character of Master Roshi. It was cool to see him. And that's really all I have to say about the characters. They were kind of forgettable, the villains anyways. Of course, the main cast. I mean, you love the main cast. You love Piccolo, you love Goku, you love Gohan, you love Krillin's little comedic moments. You love it all. You love all that stuff. But there's just not much else merit in a film that's 50 minutes long, 59 minutes, but whatever. Now I can actually shout some genuine praise this film's way. The animation, it's old, it's Toei animation from the 90s. They're not very good at what they do. Not to mention, they do a lot of stuff. But if there's one thing I always give them credit for, it's the action in Dragon Ball Z. This is probably the only bit of credit I can give to those 3 biomechanical warriors, too, because they can fight. and it looks good when they do. The fast-paced, high-octane action of Dragon Ball Z is back for this film. I complained in the Dead Zone because the action seemed a little watered down because it wasn't past the Saiyan Saga yet. And since this time paradox is in it, and Goku has these powers he shouldn't have, the one thankful saving grace from it is the fact that the action is back. And let's be honest with each other, the action is why we watch Dragon Ball Z. I mean, it's fast-paced, it's amazing, it's one of the best action martial arts animes out there. And that is the one praise I can give the animation. Now, there's always going to be a few things like repeated animation and bland backgrounds. I mean, come on. It takes place inside of a dark cave lab type thing, as well as the snowy tundra. The backgrounds throughout the entire movie are really lazily done with little to no detail a lot of the time. But that's okay. I forgive it for bringing back the great action of Dragon Ball Z. I just noticed I basically did the animation all in one take, and the music's going to be actually the same, because to be honest with you, there's not much to say about the music here. It does its job. It does have one of my favorite openings that the original Japanese soundtrack supplies, the Cha-Lao, Head-Cha-Lao soundtrack, but that's just the opening, and to be honest with you, there's not much else. Not to mention, I actually don't own the Funimation release. I have the old Pioneer release, so they use the original Japanese music. Funimation is notorious for switching the music a little bit and putting rock and roll in there, and as much as I love rock and roll, you know, it's like I don't have that copy, so I can't listen to it and I can't judge it, but I can judge the soundtrack on its own merits. I mean, heck, that's what every reviewer does now anyways, and it's nice music. It does its job. Like I said, really love that opening. I really love that opening. Oh, and the dub. I told you I have the old Pioneer DVD copy, which means I don't have the Funimation dub. I have the Ocean Studios dub. And you know me, if you watch my Dead Zone review, you know I don't like the Japanese voices for Dragon Ball Z, especially Goku. It sounds like a chick, mostly because he's actually voiced by an old lady inside the Japanese, and in this one, it's just so generic in comparison to the Funimation dub. It just doesn't do as good a job. So for me, there's no good dub to listen to, but hey, the Funimation dub's out there now. It's more relevant. You'll probably only be able to get a hold of the Funimation dub anyways, because I'm pretty sure this is actually out of print, to be honest with you. So I don't know what I'm doing with it, but that doesn't matter. There is a good dub out there. I assure you, you'll be fine. Ooh, that seems to be about time. So, time for the final verdict. I give this film a 6.1 out of 10. I mean, come on, guys. The story, I said, it had a little bit of uniquities to it, but that god-awful time paradox, man. The villainous characters were kind of boring. I didn't really like them. They didn't have much to them. Finally, the animation brought back that great high-octane action, but like I said, a lot of the backgrounds were a little boring and dull and lazy at times, not to mention the characters of those three biomechanical warriors and Dr. Wheelo. I didn't really like their designs, and Dr. Cochin, he just looked like an old codger. It really wasn't that great. And there's a good dub, the Funimation dub, but I haven't heard it, so I can't judge the dub based on that. And I don't like the Ocean dub, and I do not like the original Japanese audio. I'm going to have to say 6.1 is actually kind of fair towards this film. It's an entire number down from what Dead Zone got. It's mediocre. That's all there is to it. Have a good day. Pew pew roll, cowboy riding down.
Fly away 体中に広がるパノラマ顔を蹴られ れた地球が起こって火山を爆発させる溶けた氷の中に恐竜がいたら玉乗りし込みたいね